Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have Kristie Paskvan join us for our conversation. Kristie has 25 years of experience in financial services, asset management, real estate, insurance, and professional services. She's been a CFO, COO, president, and she's very involved in her community in Chicago and is on a number of boards. She's got some great insights that she's going to share that she's learned in her career, and I think it'll be helpful to you. Looking forward to today's conversation with Kristie. Well, I always enjoy hearing people's stories and kind of their career story. Can you give us a little bit of your background and a little bit of your history?
Absolutely. So I ended up graduating with an accounting degree from the University of Illinois, which is unusual because I actually started out as a voice major for a year, realized there's no way I'm going to make any money doing this. I'm not that good. I'm not going to get to Broadway. And so I turned to my roommate one year and said, "Hey, what is it that you're doing?" And she said accounting, and I became an accounting major. Do you believe that? That's hardly the way most people find their careers. Right. But after graduation, I went into public accounting, stayed there for about 7 years, didn't really want to be a partner, but got my CPA, left and went to a real estate firm and spent the next 10 years in real estate at two different firms. It was either property management, lots of hotels and office buildings, which today aren't really in vogue in terms of investors, but also real estate development and learned a lot there, had some great bosses. Eventually, the second real estate firm I was at was purchased by a financial services firm. And I didn't really know that much about financial services. At the same time, I was getting my MBA from Northwestern. I got an executive MBA at the time and ended up at this new financial services firm running the financial planning and analysis group, and eventually became the chief financial officer, where I was for over 20 years. So really had a nice run, but a lot of it was not planned, and a lot of it was just being open to opportunities.
So I like to ask this question. Most every guest is if you were able to go back and talk to a 22-year-old Kristie and give her some advice, what would you tell her?
Yeah, there's a lot of things I think I would tell her. I think I would start by saying, learn a lot about yourself. Sometimes we want to compare ourselves to other people and not necessarily realize our own gifts. And I like to I work with some students now as an executive mentor at the University of Illinois, and I like to tell them to really focus in on what they're good at and their skill sets, and then they can always surround themselves later with people that have other different skill sets. I think I would also tell them to really focus in on relationships. They don't really appreciate yet what it means to have your own advisory board of people that you can go talk to. I once had a boss who would leave every Friday afternoon and he would go meet with his personal advisory board just to kind of run things by him. That network of people, I think, is really, really important to have. And then lastly, I think I would tell them there are no wrong decisions. I think they worry a lot about, am I taking the right job? Am I doing the right things? Sometimes you just take a job and it's more about the opportunity that you make of it and what you learn and your intellectual curiosity that'll help propel you further in your career.
Yeah, great advice. Is there any advice that you received early on that you, looking back on, you would have should have ignored?
Yeah, I would say maybe people told me not necessarily to job hop. I didn't, but right. I may have stayed a little too long at a couple different places that I was at. I think back then it was in vogue that you would take a job and stay there for a long, long time. And I think, perhaps at some point I may have realized that some of the opportunities that I had, or maybe I would have been more courageous. Let's put it that way. Maybe I would have been more courageous about taking an opportunity and not worrying so much about what other people were doing or what it meant and looked like on my resume.
So you mentioned having kind of a personal advisory board. And I'm sure there's mentors that you can look back on that had impact on you and your career and kind of your leadership. Talk a little bit more about that, of things that you should be looking for as far as in mentors and possibly even on an advisory board, and how would you approach somebody to be on your board?
Yeah, I think I would tell people that you really want people that are going to tell you the truth.
Mm.
You don't necessarily want people that are always going to agree with you, but you want people that are going to tell you the truth and have your best interests in mind. And that requires a lot of trust, right? So you want people that not only that you could be vulnerable with, but people that can be vulnerable with you, because that's how you gain trust between individuals. The way I think people are always willing to help. I've always been surprised in my career at how, if you just ask, people are always willing to give of themselves, give of their time, help you out. And that's just been just common throughout my career. And I think if you just go to people and explain what it is that you're trying to do, throw in a little lunch here and there, and you easily will gather a group of people that really enjoy each other and can learn a lot from each other in all circumstances. So that's, I think, what I would do. So
take us back to that first leadership position that you had. And a lot of times people, maybe are great at their job, an individual contributor, and all of a sudden they're tapped on the shoulder and said, I see in you the, leadership capability. But go back to that first position that you had as you were leading a team, and what do you wish you would have known in that position?
I think I wish I would have known really just what I was talking about, that sometimes to be a leader, you have to be vulnerable because you have to instill trust in people. You can't simply just say, because I have a title, that means I'm in charge and that means I know best. That's ridiculous. So when it comes right down to it, I do think titles sometimes are something that doesn't necessarily help organizations. There's too much emphasis on titles and not enough emphasis on skill sets and what people bring to the table that may be different. So I would say that having vulnerability and establishing trust is critical when you're initially a leader.
So you've worked with a number of boards over the years, and sometimes leaders, especially first-time CEOs, maybe haven't had that experience of working with a board. What are some things that you give to people kind of first time that they've worked with a board? Some advice that you give around that?
Yeah, I've worked with a number of different boards, and I continue to do that here in my career as I'm on a number of different boards, as for profit as well as not for profit. But when I was a chief financial officer and working with a board, I started by, you really just have to listen. You get to know a little bit about the personality of each person, what it is that they're focused on, how you can help them understand what's going on. You learn how to anticipate questions from the board as you get to know them, and you start to create relationships with board members. It's not unusual to meet with board members outside of the board meetings that are going on, just so that you can give them more information and be able to run things by them. Of course, your first obligation is to your CEO, and boards usually don't get involved with management, et cetera, but they are focused on succession, capital allocation, strategy, governance. And so as much as you can help them with any of those things, and provide information to them during the meeting that is concise, that talks about where there's efficiencies that can be gained, where there's costs that can be corralled, where you can have speed in what you're doing. I think they really want to see what value can be added through what you're doing.
So Think back to some of the best leaders that you worked for in the past. What are some of the characteristics that stood out? You mentioned the trust factor is one that people look for as far as in a leader. Anything else that you think would be?
Yeah, I would say inspiration. Someone who can influence is very important. I was reading a book. It's about Stephen Schwartzman, the CEO of Blackstone. And he was talking about all of the times where he was able to influence people and get things done. And a lot of it was just about his optimism, his perseverance. I was really kind of stunned by the number of things he was able to do that were really just out of his personality of, I can make this happen. And he really believed in himself. So having someone who can create who is able to have people feel like they belong, people feel like they're valued, again, the trust factor, and then who can inspire and make you believe in something bigger than yourself. I think those are great leaders.
So you mentioned a book that you read recently, and it seems like most leaders are constantly looking for new material. But what's on the top of your list that you recommend to other leaders?
Yeah, we talk about this pretty frequently in some of the groups that I'm in. Anything by Simon Sinek, in terms of he's got Start With Why and Eaters Eat Last and The Infinite Game. A lot of people talk about understanding the why and how they were intentional in their career about what they did. I think those books are very good. There's a book by Chip and Dan Heath called The Power of Moments. I think that helps emphasize how important it is to create these moments for people where they do feel belonging, where they do feel trust, where they do feel joy. I think those are what people remember as opposed to anything that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think those are very important. And then that book by Stephen Schwartzman is called What It Takes. And I think that's just a really good example of believing in yourself and believing that you can get something done and having the ability to influence people to make it move forward.
So any quotes that you refer to?
Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. I find everyone to be dissatisfied with their life lately. And I don't know if that's partly from the pandemic or if that's a lot of social media or, in terms of people comparing themselves to others on social media. I've read some of that a little bit. Another quote I have is by Maya Angelou that goes something like, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Again, that whole creating that interaction with people that makes them want to work with you and then makes them feel comfortable with working with you. So those are two that I frequently talk to students about, and as well as my peers.
Now, I know you're very involved with different groups within your community and in the Chicagoland area. Talk about that as far as just the importance of those relationships. We mentioned about connecting with others and getting an advisory board, but talk a little bit about that and the importance that it's made in your career.
Yeah, that's really been important to me. I had a CEO who passed away while I was working with him, and I remember he was the face of our organization. And I remember as a board, we said, okay, we really need to get out there more. And up until that point, while I had been on a couple not-for-profit boards, it hadn't been a real focus. And I made the point of joining a number of organizations, the Economic Club, the Executives Club, the Commercial Club, of being on a board, not-for-profit board. And I went out frequently. I was out, I would say 3 or 4 times a week, making sure I went. And I would just walk up to people and introduce myself. And it got to a point finally where someone said to me, hey, I've really noticed how much you've been out in the community. And I was invited on the United Way board of Metropolitan Chicago for that. And so those relationships and being able to be out there and to give back in the community and really are important in terms of being in the right place at the right time, plus being top of mind for people. If they see you a lot, they're going to know that you're someone who's involved and who has a stake in their organization, and you'll be thought of when something comes up. So I really think those relationships and giving back into the community is very, very important.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've talked to executives once in a while. They'll say, I've been so busy in my work that I've not looked up and I've not, connected with people I should be connecting with. And I think that's great advice. So outside of work, what do you like to do to recharge?
So I love to go out west and hike. I'm an introvert by nature, and so my recharging means I need to get away a little bit and see a horizon and think things through. And so I do a lot of exercising. I like to hike a lot. I like to cross country ski. I like to be out and about. And so I tend to do a lot of things to recharge that are kind of individual or with my significant other together. So.
Yeah. Well, what is some parting advice you would give a new or up and coming leader?
I would say for a new leader, again, I would say instilling trust is probably the most important thing, and having vulnerability. I think whenever you're putting together a team, you want to have people that are different from you, as well as people that, you enjoy being around, but you also want people that are going to challenge you, and you want a lot of diversity and of thought on your team, as well as just diversity in general, because that's how you're going to get kind of the best view and the best ideas coming forth. But having the ability to inspire and create trust and moments that people are comfortable with are really critical for the team to be able to gel and work together well.
Well, that's great advice, and definitely appreciate your taking time out of your schedule to talk to us today, Kristie, and wish you continued success in the boards and all the groups that you're part of, that you're helping kind of the next generation of leaders.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.